All right, let's head on over to Cali Race so that way we can see what new parts have showed up for the Excursion and check out their shop. All right, it's time to load up all the parts we got for the Excursion, head back to the shop, but I want to say a huge thank you to Cali Raised for getting us situated with the parts we needed for that Excursion project, for inviting us over to tour the shop and tour their shop space. Let's head back to the shop. All right, we're back from Cali Raised Off-Road, and we've got the new parts here for the Excursion. We're gonna get a little bit nerdy and get into the specs. First things first are the new Method bronze wheels. This wheel bolt pattern actually stays metric. It is an 8x170 bolt pattern, not a ton of wheel options in what I wanted. I kept contemplating between a 17 and an 18. I settled on a 17 by 8.5 with a 0 offset, or as they would call it, a 4.5 inch backspace, with a 37 by 12.5 Cooper STT Pro tire. This is my tire of choice, mainly because of what I could get fairly quickly and also reading a bunch of reviews. And again, the Excursion that I based my plans off of is Mark's, and his truck, I messaged him, I was like, hey, if you had a choice of 37s, what would you get? He's like, Cooper STTs all day. 37 12.5 is my go-to. And after reading a lot on the forums, because like we mentioned, those still exist and there are people still regularly on there, the guys that drive their off-road vehicles the most are actually Jeep guys. And a huge shout out to them for providing all the information and all the mileage and road noise testing and everything for these STT Pros is what sold me on getting these. I'm getting a sticker that says mall rated because I don't know how often I'm going to be going off-road after all this money. But no, it's going to be so worth it because the truck's now going to be extremely capable. So of the parts you see in front of me are the Method wheels, the Cooper SCT Pros, the Carly suspension designed rear leaf spring pack. This is just part of the rear lift package for now. The Kings are on back order for a few more weeks. I do have some high lift Bilstein shocks that are going on the back of the truck temporarily. They're brand new. They came with the truck. It was actually for a 4 to 5 inch lift. That's exactly what these are going to provide. So I'm going to throw the Bilsteins on temporarily until those new King shocks come in from Carly, and then we'll throw those on. It does require a new upper shock mount to be welded onto the underside of the frame, and that's something that we're going to have to tackle once those shocks come in. But this is part of their rear Excursion lift package. They also have the option to do a long travel airbag package for the back of the Excursion. Being that I do have a brand new ARB twin compressor, because it is going to drive my front air locker that is brand new in box, that's something that we're going to have to tackle with mobile gear installers at a later date. For now, we want to get the truck back up and running, dial in the alignment before I decide to call them to come over and install that ARB air locker. Okay, so these are a 17 8.5 with a 37 inch tire. Originally what you saw on the truck was actually a 16 by 8 Weld Racing Cheyenne wheel. I think the offset on it is like plus 10, weird backspace. That's what keeps it slightly poked out on the stock bodied Excursion with these axles. Based on what everybody's running when they do the conversion to 05 to 07 axles, they say the ideal wheel is an 8.5 inch wide with a 4.5 inch backspace. So that's what I got with the 37s. And the tire that was on it originally is actually about a 33.4 inch tire metric. Stock only takes like a 31.6. So stock Excursions 4-wheel drive have actually a really small tire out of the gate. And this is a hell of an upgrade from that stock 31.5 inch tire. It was already upgraded, so that's why it was kind of okay for the first 5,000 miles to drive around the truck and enjoy it the way it was, because it looked good enough. But as always, modifications start taking place. Can never leave anything untouched. So now it's modified. Being over at Cali Raised really made us see an appreciation for what goes into a nice showroom. We were talking to one of the guys there, Owen, and he was telling us that all the stuff that he's putting up on the walls right now is all stuff that they physically have in inventory. So everything that you need, they try to keep in stock for all the models that are really popular right now to sell. They are huge on their display, and everything that they carry is just, it's all really good quality parts. So another item we got for this truck was actually the front runner roof rack. Right now I have the 3/4 length option in stock. I'm not 100% convinced on sticking with that because that just replaces the stock system that is on the roof right now. They have an optional universal extended full roof length roof rack. It's a really nice setup. You can put, I think it's not, I don't know if they're called wing nuts. They're little inserts that they go in so you can add attachments to it and put your brackets for your awning, for your boxes that you put on top to strap, tie downs, eyelets, whatever you need to hold your stuff on the roof of the truck. But to do the full length one, I actually need to drop the overhead console media center, the complete headliner, and then when you drill through the roof, you actually need to figure out a way to reseal that and make sure that there's no moisture or water or any elements from outside coming into that headliner area, because it's just gonna be a mess and it's gonna really ruin the inside of the truck if that happens. So right now, I'm still tossed up in the air whether or not I stick to the 3/4 length, which is just a direct replacement to what I have now, but it's like a caged box area, or if I go full length and just drop the headliner and just do it once and call it a day. But I'm not 100% convinced to go through that trouble right now. Showroom's dope. So yeah, they carry like all the big brands, like everything BDS, Raceline, Kansei, Method, King, Elka, Fox, Rotopax, Baja Designs lights. They also have transitioned their Harley-Davidson lighting company to be called A10 Moto. So that's one of their brands is for the Harley-Davidson lighting. Cali Raised Offroad is for everything off-road. So they do all Ford trucks, Bronco Raptors, your standard Bronco off-road trucks, Tacomas, 4Runners, anything you could think of that has an off-road product out there, they can get it for you. Full service center, so they will mount and balance your tires. They do installs on their suspension kits. Everything that you can buy off the shelf, they will do an install for you. All right, episode 2 on the Excursion conversion to the updated axles. If I didn't mention it in the first video, I am doing the 05 to 07 axles, and because I was already doing that, I went ahead and found the gears that I wanted to pair with the 37s. Stock, the truck came with 373s and I was running a 33-inch tire. Now with the 37s, I wanted to bump it up to a 4:10 gear ratio, and I actually was able to find a rear end that already had the factory limited slip. I know it's not the best thing to do, but I didn't want to go right out of the gate and do an ARB air locker in the rear differential. I definitely did want to do that in the front differential. I have a brand new ARB air locker for the front diff with the ARB twin air compressor, but as you see it right now, the truck is finally on all 4 wheels. It took a hell of a lot of work to figure all this stuff out. We never emailed PMF to get the instructions for any of the parts. Apparently, after finding out and doing some research, if you order the parts yourself and you don't request the instructions, they don't get sent to you automatically. I didn't know that. I have some parts that are still left to be installed. We are waiting to receive those instructions now, because the dual steering stabilizer instructions actually has measurements, so that way you don't bottom out those new King shocks on the dual steering stabilizer. We finalized all the coil conversion bucket holes and everything that needed to be drilled in the frame to be bolted on 100% secure. We figured more hardware, more better. So we wanted to make sure that any hole that was available and we could put hardware in, we did. Why are you laughing? We realized some of the things that we were missing when we started bolting everything together. When you saw it at the end of the last video, that the radius arms were just dangling there. I was actually missing the stock radius arm brackets, and I had to request those from PMF. They were in my original email requesting those stock radius arm brackets because I knew I didn't have them. With their long arm 4-link kit, I didn't know I had to have them. But again, without the instructions, I don't know what the hell we were doing. We were just placing everything, kind of mocking it up, trying to figure things out without any instructions and just going by everybody else's video. Actually, one guy's other video that showed that the long arm 4-link attached to the stock radius arm bracket. Had I not seen that video, I would have been like, what the hell are we missing? We need to extend the arm to reach the radius arm location on the axle and then just make it work. Because I mean, we were at that point and we were just like ripping our hair out, like, F it, just cut it, extend it, make it work. Thankfully, that video showed me that I was missing the stock radius arm bracket. The track bar mount was attached in position last time. It is now finalized. We have a few more holes to drill into the stock subframe or K-member of the Excursion so that stays fixed and fitted properly. But the drag link, the tie rod bar, all that stuff is on there. And like I said, we are waiting for the instructions for the dual steering stabilizer so that can be installed. One of the main things we have to do next episode is actually center the axle. We need to make sure that we are even from left to right before we start adjusting the toe and trying to get the caster settings kind of in an area of what we want before we drive this car over to alignment. Before we drive this truck over to the alignment shop and get all the arms adjusted properly so that way the geometry is all correct, I have the right amount of caster, and it places the wheels exactly where we want, where I don't actually have to cut the stock fenders or flares, and that's the plan and that's the goal. If the axle needs to move a slight bit forward to avoid cutting the stock fenders and fender wells, then great, we're gonna do that. I did see on a couple guys like Busted Knuckle Films, they did the Cali coilover conversion on their Excursion. They're running 37s with the same wheel back spacing and everything. Yes, they do have an updated and modified front bumper, but they didn't cut their fenders and they have full turning radius. Everything works without cutting the stock fenders or the flares. My plan is to put larger flares to fill the look of the wheel and tire more, now that it is sticking out about 1.5 inches, 2 inches over the stock body and the stock fender flare. But that's something that we're going to deal with later when the axle is fully centered, fully aligned, and in its final resting place. The rest of the front end parts, I still have to adjust the coilover and figure out what the ride height is. Right now, the front coilover has no preload. They have not been charged either. So that's something I have to deal with and figure out what our final ride height is going to be. I know that this is a almost inline linear coilover, so it shouldn't really change the alignment too much, but I want to be certain because just like when we do the Japanese cars, you change the ride height, the toe, caster, camber settings all change. So on a solid axle, I don't believe that's the case, but I want to make sure that I don't have to align the truck twice. So I do need to figure out where the ride height and preload is going to be on the coilover. It has an adjustable bump stop, so where the second spring starts, seems like a Delrin collar that will then hit those collar bump stops. So being with the weight that it's on it right now, where do those collars need to be before it either blows a seal in the shock or just bottoms out way too hard? And I want to get that set before we do a full alignment on the front end of the truck. The difference between my coilover setup and the coilover setup that's on my dad's Suburban is actually the fact that I have a longer stroke shock. So there is a dual rate system. After talking to Trevor over at PMF, the shorter spring is actually rated at the same as my long spring, but the upper spring is my first point of compression on the spring. Once that runs out of travel, then it starts to actuate the lower spring. It's similar in terms of a helper spring, but a helper spring is generally a much shorter length spring to take some of that pressure, because when you articulate and extend that wheel, the coil doesn't just like get loose and wobble around. It still has tension with the helper spring. Same thing as a dual rate coilover, except that this is a longer stroke shock and a much longer overall eyelet to eyelet length compared to my dad's setup. His helper spring is still a 3-inch spring, but I believe the rate on the helper is around 200 to 250 pounds per square inch, whereas my primary spring is 500 pounds per square inch and it is a 10-inch spring. So that's the difference between my dual rate coilover and then his helper spring coilover. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the front suspension and the differences of a dual rate coilover and a helper spring coilover. All right, dual rate coilovers. I have a 10-inch primary spring with a 12-inch secondary spring. The primary spring is what is going to collapse first as my initial driving spring rate. When that reaches its bump stop point, the second spring begins to take over and it will then compress. But we need to be able to adjust the initial spring collar to the bump stop, so that way it avoids from us hitting the internal bump of the shock where it actually bottoms out internally, because we don't want to damage the shock. We want to stop that before it happens. This coil bucket actually has the provision to add a secondary bump stop, or I can do it on the frame, but ideally I probably am going to add a secondary bump, not a secondary shock, because I just really want to limit damaging this shock. Comparing this dual rate coilover over to my dad's Suburban, this is a longer stroke coilover. Eyelet to eyelet is quite a few inches longer overall than his, but his still has a helper spring setup. It's just designed differently because it's a shorter stroke shock, so we're gonna go ahead and check that one out now. Looking at the coilover on the Suburban, he also has a complete king coilover shock with a dual rate technically, but his helper spring is actually a shorter helper spring. From what I can read on the numeration on the helper spring, he is still running a 500 pound per square inch helper spring, similar to my primary spring that is 500 pounds per square inch. He has a helper spring though because he has a shorter stroke, so he only had this much available space eyelet to eyelet, and based on what he wanted his up and down travel to be, he spec'd this coilover specifically to how much movement he wanted on his axle. The king coilover that's on my dad's Suburban is a different overall length eyelet to eyelet, so that's why he has a shorter primary spring, or what we're going to call a helper spring, because it is completely collapsed at ride height. That is actually going to help for his down travel. When his down travel is articulating, like he goes into a dip or a curve or whatever, when it dips down, it is still going to keep tension on the main coil spring, so that way it doesn't become loose and come essentially out of socket. But his is designated as a helper spring because that's exactly what it is. It's a much shorter helper spring. It keeps the mainspring in contact with the collars and everything, so that way the stroke is all still uniform. One of the things that I had to figure out finally, once all the suspension is dialed in, I need to decide whether or not I'm going to update the front end of the truck. Now, do I go with the 2014-ish Super Duty front end, or do I go even newer and go to the 2017 and up Super Duty front end? All those parts are available, the conversion parts are available. I like the fact that all this stuff is OEM Ford items right now because the fit and finish on it is perfect. If I go to update the front end and I have to buy newer OEM Ford products, I have to find like junkyard parts, like find one fender here, another fender there, figure out what bumper setup I want to go. Do I go stock bumper, which grille, which headlights, like all that stuff starts to add up a ton. The truck does still need to be essentially color matched with the hood, and the roof does have some fading, so I need to address all that stuff in the front end. But now I'm contemplating whether I even go that route or just put the stock bumper back on it, trim it to fit so that way the 37's clear, and start getting all those parts to do the updated front end. I'm extremely torn between that, only because I saw this Excursion that was all done up. We went to lunch the other day and it was, I think, at King's Fish House. Freaking truck was perfect. It had 37s, the full Cali updated suspension with the new axles, crazy front bumper, huge rear bumper with the spare tire carrier and a box carrier, the Amp Power Step XLs. Like, there's still stuff that I need to buy for this truck, but he also had the updated 2014 front end with, it looked like aftermarket headlights. He went some parts aftermarket just because it might be the same cost or slightly better, and you have like cooler lighting features on the new headlights. Headlights are headlights. I just want them to work. I need to be able to see at night, and I need to be able to see in low light. So I don't really care about 20 projectors in my headlights. So I'd likely be choosing just like a stock OEM projector with an HID, and that's it. But seeing that truck really kind of ruined it for me, because I do really want to update the look of the truck, because I am still going to update some of the interior items of the truck, reupholster the seats, redo the carpet, figure out if I'm going to do a full rubber liner or just all new black carpet, just to hide some of the dirt and stuff, being that I have 2 kids and we want to take this out to the dirt. It'll hide the dirt a lot better. So if I do the updated front end on the truck and I choose like some crazy bumper, the truck is already 19 feet long stock. So it's hard enough as it is. Like I said, this is my daily driver, grocery getter, park at school to pick up Ellie. Like, I need to be able to put this in certain spaces that I otherwise won't be able to if I have a spare tire carrier with a box and a bigger front bumper that's like more of a bull bar. Where the hell am I going to park this? I'm going to park at the top of the hill. I mean, I kind of need it, but I don't want to do that all the time. Sometimes I'm pressed for time. I need to be closer to the school, but grocery stores doesn't really matter. I park far away anyway. I hate getting door dings. people really don't respect bigger trucks today. Everybody's in a Tesla or something small, and they just don't give a shit. They're just commuters, A to Bs. They don't have a pride or a passion for their car or truck. So I always park far away regardless. That's the other thing. I need to order the bigger mirrors. So these are like the standard non-tow mirrors. Like this has tow package and everything, but they opted for the smaller mirrors because they didn't want the extenders. So I'm gonna already update to the 2014 mirrors that has the turn signal built, because this mirror right now they're heated with turn signals. So I'm gonna do the same setup, but it's gonna be the bigger box mirrors, because that way it also has a blind spot mirror placed on the bottom, because now that I'm probably 5 inches higher than what it was before with the tire height and the suspension height. So I really need to be able to see down in my blind spot area. All right, we're gonna talk about the rear of the suspension right now. So like as I mentioned, I did get a 2007 single rear wheel axle with 410 gears and a factory limited slip. So that is now in its resting place with the new Carli leaf spring pack. That Carli leaf spring pack is their designated rate and how it articulates for the truck to be essentially more of a crawler, and that is actually designed and engineered by Carli, but assembled and built by Deaver. Deaver is also another company that's local to us in SoCal, and so is Carli. Carli's in Elsinore, Deaver's in Santa Ana, King Shocks is in Garden Grove. So like all these companies that we are working with, thankfully they are all local. On the rear of the setup, the Carli rear shocks that are designed by them, built by King, were on about 12-week back order. I already had a set of Bilstein shocks that was gonna work for this lift height on the back leaf pack. So we decided to throw those in for now as a temporary driving shock, just so that way we can figure out all the other kinks and the bugs of the truck on the front end before those new rear shocks come in. The rear shock is an extended stroke to match the front. So it's a big 2.5-inch body with a remote reservoir, but the only thing is that we will have to weld in an upper shock mount that replaces the current one. Based on the location of where it mounts is where you're getting that extra stroke from. One of the things we do have to take into account is the difference in ride height. Right now the leaf pack is fresh and new, and so is the front coilover system, so there isn't any settling that has been done yet because the truck hasn't rolled, it hasn't really moved. It's been taken off jack stands and it's just resting. We need to figure out if there's going to be any settle period time for the rear leaf pack and the front springs, because we need to see what the ride height is actually going to be. Right now the nose is dipping a little bit more than the rear end, and I do want it to sit completely level, but I do need to figure out what the hell I'm gonna do on the front end, because if I do add a winch and a front tube bumper or steel bumper, that's going to weigh down the front end a lot more. So then I'll need to compensate that with the preload of the front spring. The ride height will change. Hopefully the alignment doesn't change when we do that, but I need to already account for that. So if I need to raise the front end slightly higher than the rear, then I might have to do that. Luckily it won't be in a full Carolina squat. It'll just be about a 1/4 to 1/2 inch. So to the naked eye, it might not be that noticeable. It's just going to be dependent on the angle that the truck is parked in, where you'll actually notice it more or not. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. On the next video, this truck's gonna be finally driving under its own power. We're gonna go ahead and head off to alignment, adjust the coilovers preload, get them charged. And if you made it this far in the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because what else are you supposed to do when you make it to the end of the video? Hit that subscribe button. We're gonna do more off-road shit. I don't care if you don't like it, we're still doing it. We're doing more JDM car stuff, more European car stuff. We do everything. You want us to work on your car? Hit us up in the DMs, in the comments, in the emails, everything. Bye. So we wanted to make sure that any hole that was available and we could put hardware in, we did. Why are you laughing?
You're clearly the dad, you're filling all the holes.
Oh my god. Idiot. Oh yeah, never put Armor All on off-road tires. It's disgusting, and that shit goes everywhere. So see now, nothing. Great. You put Armor All on this shit, it starts like bringing all the oils out, and it's gross. First things first though.
You know, Jeeps know a lot about road testing. I don't think they take them off-road.
They do though, because they go in groups, because with the Jeep community, their buddies are like, hey, let's all get Jeeps and go camping.
No. They get Jeeps and then go to the mall. They go shopping. Yeah.